Hey guys, we're going to talk about grammar today. I know just how much everybody loves grammar, right? Am I right? Yeah. Well, grammar is actually awesome. It's a sure shot. It's like a done deal. It's if you're good at it, you're going to get most of the questions correctly, and on most of your tests, even if you're doing ACTs, LSATs, or SATs, you might get grammar. And grammar makes up nearly 30% of most English tests, actually. So we're going to talk about punctuation today. So just a quick rundown on the punctuations. And then we're going to try to do some live questions for grammar and see if I'll show you how I think of punctuations and how I address punctuations. Maybe it'll get you to think a little bit differently. Not like me, but something. When you watch someone run through the scenarios, it's actually quite helpful for me per se. When I see someone go through the same pains as I did, it helps rather than just looking at a lesson. So when it comes to punctuations, and that's not how you spell punctuations, the most common ones that you're going to encounter is comma, semicolon, period, of course, dashes. So those can actually get quite confusing at times, but for a comma, it's quite self-explanatory that it's going to separate two clauses that are not complete or fragmented sentences, and it's going to try to combine the two. So sometimes the structure of a comma is, and again, these are fairly basic, and I'm going to try to do it as quickly as possible without giving a whole history about comma. So comma structure is almost like this: fragment, which is an incomplete sentence, then you have a comma, you have a fragment. Okay? So that's one possibility for a comma. It combines two fragments. Sometimes it can combine independent clause and dependent. So that's another structure. And sometimes you'll find a comma to have some kind of detail. So something like a fragment, and then some extra detail, then fragment. It's something like that. And on your SATs, you're going to get one of these situations, and you're going to have to understand how to handle them. And if you just think of it as a connector, that it's trying to connect two thoughts together, a fragment or an independent clause. That's not how you spell it. Independent. Wow. Anyway, so again, what do we need? Do we need Grammarly? Do we need grammar in the day and age of Grammarly? Actually, we do. Because the AIs haven't quite caught on yet. And quite frankly, it's a good thing when a language evolves to be more efficient. I actually don't mind that. Like, we're gonna start talking in terms of bring your own cookie, BYOC. It just keeps getting more efficient, and eventually for the detailed ones, the AIs can take over. But the AIs are not as smart yet. So if we're doing machine learning, we still have to teach the AI quite a bit. So for that, we need to know a lot of proper usage. So anyway, without further ado, we're going to move on. Is there any other... okay, sometimes the comma can also come as a finisher. It would be like taught and finisher. So again, it has to be a fragment. All of these are actually fragment. What is a fragment? A fragment is an incomplete sentence, like when the clock ticks 5. o'clock. Okay, so that's a fragment. Something that lacks the subject-verb agreement or a complete structure. It's kind of intuitive. You're gonna know if you read a fragment is just gonna be like a broken sentence, and then there's a finisher. So now the other thing is semicolon. So semicolons can get tricky. They're actually almost like a mini period. Okay, they are almost like that. So whatever is before a semicolon has to be a complete or an independent clause. You know, an independent clause, and then semicolon, independent clause. Okay, getting dyslexic today. So that would be the structure of a semicolon, and semicolons and periods can actually be used interchangeably, and it wouldn't be wrong. You know, per se, on your SAT, you might not get an ambiguous choice where like pick from answer A or B, and they will give you like, hey, a choice A, you know, blah, 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 semicolon, or choice B. They're not going to give you that because they know that semicolon and periods are kind of interchangeable. So that's kind of the structure of a semicolon. So it's going to be a complete sentence, kind of like more like a fully formed sentence, you know, before a semicolon, and then, you know, sentence, something like that. So it's important to know that semicolon and period can be used interchangeably, and it wouldn't be wrong. It wouldn't be wrong if we were to interchange those. And let's see if I'm forgetting something. Yeah, sometimes semicolons can also be used when a sentence just keeps going long. Let me see if I can get an example. Let's say, when would we use a period? When would we use a semicolon? So it's a taste thing. If it's a preference thing, more like, let's say Anastasia is a very large boat. Period. Anastasia has a half-mile long deck. Okay, so that wouldn't be wrong. It's a simple structure, but it wouldn't be wrong. But what we could do here is like this. Anastasia is a very large boat, semicolon. It has a half-mile long deck. So what we did here is, when it's not an official sentence per se, like it has all structures working for it, like, you know, if you would just say it has a half-mile long deck, somebody's going to be like, what is it? You know, what does it mean? Then you have to specify instead of it, if there was a period before that, Anastasia has a half-mile long deck. But when you put a semicolon, it allows you to be a little bit more, actually a little less formal. It allows you to be less formal when you use semicolons, even though you will see that in legal jargon, when a lot of rules are stated, they would be stated in complete sentences with some semicolons. So that would be that. So next thing would be a colon. Okay, a colon is an enumerator most of the times. Okay, like if you were to, rainbow has 7 colors, such as red, you know, and then you list the whole thing, and then period. So if we were to just not keep saying such as every time, we could replace that with a colon. So anytime you, yes, a colon. So rainbow has 7 colors, colon, red, and then you list the whole thing. So that's one way to think of colons, is it can be replaced with the word such as. So it's a good thing to know if you're trying to figure that out. And sometimes when the list starts to go really long, sometimes we could be enumerating things like a really long thought with so many rules, and then we can say colon, rule 1, semicolon, rule 2, semicolon, rule 3, instead of commas. Now, these rules, they could be long sentences, like, let's say, the awnings of restaurants should not be longer than 3 feet. Then, next one. The easements of the aforementioned blah blah etc. This. So it's basically, it could be used as a long list. So when we're using simple words, let's say red, green, comma, blue. Then it's simple. It's a simple list. That's fine. But it can also be used in legal jargon where you have a longer list, so then we can't really use comma because this whole thing is a complete sentence. It's an independent clause. We can't use a comma to separate an independent clause with an independent clause. You can do this. You can have an independent clause and then a dependent clause, but you can't have independent clause, comma, independent clause. That's something to remember. So next thing is dashes. Dash. You think of it like a comma, like a comma. It can be used interchangeably as a comma, but most common uses of it is to have some extra detail, like sentence, extra detail, dash, and then finish it. Or you could use that to draw conclusions or a continued thought. So some evidence and reasoning, and then conclusion. So that's also a structure of dashes. You can think of them like comma, and again, you may not see a dash and a comma as an alternative choice unless there is a grammatical error. So they would not make it ambiguous on most of your tests. They still can. The other one is ellipsis. And yeah, a lot of people just in forums, they're like, yeah, right. That's not really grammatically correct. But what that really means is that it's an incomplete sentences and there is more detail. There's more detail here. So if you don't want to say the whole detail, we actually say the ellipsis ... like from 4 miles to, and then something. You don't want to finish that, and then that is a reference into another passage or a paragraph that has something that starts with this. That's when you would be like from this to end. So that means there's more text in the middle. That's when we use an ellipsis. So let's just kind of dive down into a little bit of live grammar. And I'll just go to Khan Academy and just pick some of those questions. And yeah, so this thing should help you understand quite a bit. If I do let's do a bunch of these for some punctuations. Khan Academy is actually a pretty good repository to answer some of these questions. They do have explanations as well, but it really does help when you see somebody go through these questions and kind of elaborate their thought process. At least it works for me. It may not work for you, but just seeing somebody apply the concepts in a simpler way, that helps out. Okay. Crows and ravens are both large. Blackbirds. Okay, that. Crows and ravens are both large. blackbirds. They can be distinguished by the difference in their voices. Okay, so there's something obviously wrong here. Crows and ravens are both large black birds. Should be a period there, so then it would be a complete sentence. Distinguished by, they can be distinguished by. Okay, so it's obviously between B and C. Okay, distinguished by would be an incomplete sentence. You know, who is distinguished by? It's lacking the subject, and it's important for a sentence to be have a complete subject. Without that, it would be considered a fragment. So it would definitely be this. Okay. So you see, grammar is actually, if you know your content, especially in punctuation, it's one of the easiest areas to score points in. In order to retrieve and study the bones of the early hominids. Period. Okay, already it's wrong, because in order to retrieve and study the bones of the early hominid, it's not a complete, it's a fragment. So this obviously is ruled out. So what should there be? The paleoanthropologist hired a team of explorers. So in order to study the bones of the early hominids should be a Okay, so it could be either B or C, because this whole thing is a complete sentence as well. The paleoanthropologist hired a team of explorers who were now things. It's a complete sentence. So a comma separates a fragment with another fragment. Now these, it should still be a comma, because this part here is a fragment, a fragment of the sentence. See, I almost made a mistake. I thought that, I thought that this was a full sentence. So it's definitely this, because it's a fragment, comma, finisher. Fragment, comma, dependent clause, independent clause. So that would be the case in here. Yep. Let's see, it says right here, dependent clause, independent clause. Okay, well, it's tricky. Hindus routinely bathe in India's sacred Ganges River, also home to the Ganges shark. Okay, so this looks like an extra detail, so this would be a great place to use a dash, but a dash and comma can be interchanged in a way. So that would be the my first guess in here. See, it shouldn't be a semicolon, because semicolon structure is independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. So what's after here should be a finished clause or a finished sentence. So it can't be C. I think it's a comma. Okay. The dean of the Art Institute of Chicago denied admission to Kyle because he couldn't name the three primary colors: blue, red, and yellow. Okay, so they're doing a list. So it shouldn't be, okay, so they have two tricky choices, colon, and then which are blue. That would be redundant. You don't want to say colon, and then also say such as or which are, so it would be this. A supermoon is named because it appears larger and brighter than usual. It happens at the closest point to Earth on the moon's orbit, also known as the perigee. Okay, so this part is an extra detail. So kind of like what we were talking about, a finisher, some extra detail, or some evidence in reasoning dash conclusion. So when something like that happens, you can use a dash or a comma. So it'd be that. Okay, let's do a couple more of these. So it'll really give you the idea of the whole thing. I'll try to go fast so I don't take up too much of your time and my time. But hey, I actually like grammar. It's a sure deal. If you know your stuff, you should be scoring about 100% in this. The Credible Hulk was much more reasonable than the Incredible Hulk, supporting his arguments with data before engaging in smashing. This is funny. Okay, supporting his argument with data before engaging in smashing. That's an incomplete sentence. This is a complete sentence, but this is an incomplete sentence. So it's almost like a finisher. So it should still be a comma. It can't be a semicolon. And it can't be a period. So it should be a comma there. Although Indonesia claims to have most islands of any nation, Finland, with 180,000 islands, actually has more. So right off the bat, although, statement starts with although Indonesia claims to have most islands of any nation, can't have period after that. It's an incomplete sentence. It's a fragment. So it's either going to be a comma, can't even be a semicolon, a colon. So it'll be a comma there. All the choices should kind of work out. Violet might have won the competition to be Willy Wonka's successor, colon, had she not eaten the inflatable gum and turned into a giant blueberry. Okay, it's an incorrect use of a colon because it's not a list and it's not any kind of enumeration, although you can use it, but the requirement has to be that this should be a complete clause, even if you were to use that. So a comma should be the proper thing there. Can't be a period because then had she not eaten inflatable gum would be an incomplete sentence. So, I mean, if you want to see what these are, you could just pause it, and if you want to take your own guess and see if your guess is correct, pause before I give the answer. But I'm fairly certain this is the answer. Okay, 3 out of 3 so far. Good, on a streak. While time capsules are a popular method of preserving items for the future, they're not always successful. So fragment, period, that can't be the case. It should be fragment, then a comma. So it'd be a comma is the best here. Okay. Ironically, John Marine's 1822 painting, Destruction of Pompeii and Herculaneum, was itself destroyed in a 1928 London flood. Okay, so incomplete sentence, and that is a period. So ironically, and then a period. So it should be a comma here, I think. Yeah, should be the case. Yeah. All right. Let's do some more of these punctuation ones. The geologist, the printmaker, and the scissor manufacturer played a game of rock, paper, scissors, each displaying a preference that complemented their occupation. The geologist, the printmaker, and the scissor manufacturer played a game of rock, paper, scissors. So that's a complete sentence. Each displaying a preference that complemented their occupation. That's a tricky one. Can't be a... I think I'll just go by the normal guess. Should be a comma there. Before cleaning her turtle's tank. Okay, shouldn't be a period there. Sophie always tied a helium balloon around the animal so that he would be easier to find. That's a fairly simple one. Incomplete, and then finisher. Dependent, independent clause. Combines it together with a comma. Should be good. Alright, fingers crossed, fingers crossed. Can we do 100% all the way through? During what would otherwise have been a boring presentation on safety, Tyrone added a few jokes to the script that kept the students in stitches. Okay, so again, during what would have otherwise been a boring presentation on safety. That's an incomplete sentence, so I think the comma is a good choice there. After 550 people volunteered at the King's Circle station in Mumbai. The station grew cleaner, safer, and even more beautiful. These are kind of easy now. after such and such, incomplete sentence, and then the finisher. So it'll be that. Last one. Tech titan Steve Jobs loved raw carrots and reportedly ate several per day, turning skin an orange hue. That can happen, you know. Turning his skin an orange blue. Okay. Where were we? Although urban gardening has become very popular, city gardeners need to be careful to protect their crops from soil contaminants. Is this a period after this? Okay. Although, so incomplete sentence, should be a comma here. Artist, biologist Joseph Tomelleri is painstaking in his drawings of fish, detailing minutiae like the exact number of scales and the tiny variation in color. Okay, so detailing exact number, that's an incomplete sentence. So it should be a comma, fragment, and then a complete sentence. Two fragments, basically, actually. The old adage that sarcasm is the lowest form of wit might not be true. According to a 2015 study by Huang, Gino, and Galinsky, the study claims that people who make sarcastic comments while attempting a difficult task are more likely to be creative in their problem solving. Okay, so according to a study by such and such. Okay, so the old adage that sarcasm might not be true according to a study by Huang, Gino, and Galinsky. So that is a complete sentence. So it should be a period or a semicolon, but now here, see, this is what I was talking about. You know, sometimes they will throw in a semicolon and a period at the same time, but this one is not correct because they have an and. So that will be redundant. You have a semicolon and then also add an and, changing your, you know, independent clause into a fragment. So that would definitely not be the case. So this was a trick question here. So independent clause, period, and then another independent clause. The study came. So I guarantee you, tricky. Readers may think that Carolyn Keene was prolific and long-lived writer. Okay. Publishing more than such and such. Okay, so this one, publishing more than, is a fragment. So there should be a comma there. So there are two comma choices. First is she published. Okay, well, if you're doing a comma, then you also add a subject, she published. That would make the comma redundant. The whole purpose of the comma is to keep and combine two fragments so your sentence is actually shorter. Now, if you were to say she published, then you might as well make it a period or a semicolon. So in this case, I would go with this, publishing more than that. So tricky. We're on a streak here. Although Samuel Clemens was a prolific journalist while using his given name. Although Samuel Clemens was a prolific journalist while using his given name, he became one of the most famous fiction writers of all time, using his pen name Mark Twain. This might be actually correct here. Yeah, this might actually just be correct because this is a fragment separated by a comma and then a finisher. He became, although blah, 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 dependent clause, finishing clause. So it's, when you're using a comma, it's quite important for, see, one of these to be independent. See, the order can actually be different. You know, it could be like this. Dependent. There's all sorts of dyslexic today. Okay, dependent. And then it could be independent. Could be something like that. Where were we? Yeah. So it should just be a comma so it'll be no change. Yeah. Well, all right. So that kind of sums up. I think we went through all the choices. We didn't quite see the ellipsis, or we didn't see the dash in this one. But sometimes you could see the dash in a conclusion. Maybe another day. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you learned something or it helped in some way watching me explain and go through the exercises myself. And you can see it's a done deal. You could, even if you skip all the questions on your test and you just do your grammar, you will still score decent, like 480, 500 plus. It's kind of like a score pinata. You know, grammar is just awesome. That's why I like grammar. It's a score piler. All right. Thank you.